Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I am really excited about what we're going to be doing today and who we're going to be hearing from. I am Dr. Augusta Palmer, and I teach in the Communication Arts Department at St. Francis College. And I am very happy to be here with you today. I want to thank a few people first. I want to thank Dr. Brian Gregory, who's invited us to come into his popular music class and sharing the time and the virtual space with us. And I want to thank David Lautfee and our student worker McCoy from Special Events for helping to put this together. And also Ben James for serving as our point person on Zoom.
On that.
and but and to Preston Lauterback for being here and joining us today. And most of all, I want to thank Mrs. Anya C. Anderson,
Uh-oh.
who's here and who's getting situated.
There you go. They're introducing you. They're just saying.
So most of all, I want to thank you, Mrs. Anderson, for being here with us today. It's so often that when we're talking about historical figures, they seem very distant from us. And I know I've been working on a project that's about history about 50 years ago, and sometimes it's hard to find the people that I need to talk to, but we're going to go back a little bit further today to talk about Robert Johnson with you. And it's our deep honor to have you here with us today on your 95th birthday. So let's give her a round of applause already. So I'm going to start by introducing Mr. Lauterback now, and he is going to give you more information about Mrs. Anderson, and she's going to read from their amazing book, which I have right here with me, Brother Robert. And then we'll have a Q&A that people can enter their questions in the Q&A field on Zoom, and I'll read the questions for Mrs. Anderson and Mr. Lauterback. This memoir that they're going to talk to us about, Brother Robert, gives us really amazing insights into Robert Johnson, who was a real musical star in the 1930s, and recorded songs like Terraplane Blues, which you just heard. And even though he died sadly very young in 1938, his influence is still very much felt in the world of music today. He was a huge influence on artists like the Rolling Stones and Eric Clapton, as well as many, many blues artists. My father, it happens, was a blues scholar who wrote a book called Deep Blues. And his book certainly fanned the flames of the legend of Robert Johnson as a kind of mythical figure at the crossroads. But I think my dad, who's been dead for quite a while now, he also understood Robert Johnson as a popular entertainer, a talented musician. And in fact, I was looking back at what he wrote about him, and he said, quote, "By 1936, Johnson thought of himself as something more than a juke joint entertainer. He was self-consciously an artist." And he went on to say, each of Johnson's blues recordings is packed with detail, both musical and verbal, and almost all of them crackle with intensity. And I have to say, I agree with that. The music is really powerful. So Mrs. Anderson's book, co-written with Preston Lauterback, gives us a very personal remembrance of the man, Robert Johnson, and talks about how he learned to play music, how he dressed, all kinds of things that are really amazing to get insight into. And now I'll introduce Preston Lauterback. Mr. Lauterback is the author of some of my favorite books about music and Memphis, including The Chitlin Circuit and The Road to Rock and Roll, Beale Street Dynasty, and Bluff City. And he has a new Substack for those of you who are into the Substacks that you can subscribe to, that's called The Chitlin Circuit. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Lauterback, now.
Well, thank you, Professor Palmer and Professor Gregory, for having us. And of course, most of all, to Mrs. Anderson joining us on her 95th, which is, I think that pretty much sums up just what I think, precious gift she is to us as fans and of Robert Johnson, and of a good story, because she is, I think, first and foremost, a great storyteller. And we will get to some of that, but I wanted to touch a little bit on Robert Johnson for the popular music class students, because of course there are people who live, eat, breathe, listen, sleep, dream Robert Johnson, and then there are others who may just be getting into him and scratching the surface. So hopefully we'll present some stories that will satisfy a broad constituency. So Robert Johnson, I couldn't say it any better than Augusta's father, Robert Palmer, did in Deep Blues, however many years ago that came out, about 40, I believe, which is that Robert Johnson was an artist. He was, of course, a blues musician, but his compositions transcend the genre, they transcend the time and place. They go far beyond any of those sort of packagings that you can put on the music to try and understand it. I would counter Augusta on one point. He was not terribly famous in his lifetime, and fame really only reached him after his death. And so I would compare him more to a Vincent van Gogh, if we're going to talk about artists who did not make it in his lifetime. But I think that speaks to the magnitude and the power of his contributions, that they were able to speak to so many subsequent generations so profoundly, though long gone and from long ago. So he has influenced, you know, as Augusta noted, the Stones, Led Zeppelin, the Grateful Dead. Bob Dylan is another one who's been a big Robert Johnson fan, and someone who I think has never ceased to be fascinated with Johnson. He covered Robert Johnson's material back in 1960, and he just gave an interview last year about how nobody's ever caught up to Robert Johnson. Can't say it much better than Bob Palmer and Bob Dylan when it comes to summarizing the greatness of poor Bob, Mr. Robert Johnson. Something that I think is exciting about Mrs. Anderson is this. Everybody from Bob Dylan to Robert Palmer to many others who got into Robert Johnson did so after he was gone, after Robert Johnson had passed away. And so there's always going to be that nostalgic kind of retrospective, well, he was like this, well, I saw him here, well, we did that, almost secondhand perspective on Robert Johnson. He didn't give any interviews, okay? There was very little, if any, well, there were a couple little press clippings about he and his recordings during his lifetime. All he left were those records, or so we thought. A couple years ago, Mrs. Anderson, at the age of 92, decided that it was time to come forward and tell her story. And so she grew up in the same extended family as Robert Johnson. They were, I believe, 15 years apart in age. So she came forward when, you know, myself as a longtime Johnson fan, didn't think that there was anybody out there who had that type of knowledge, who knew the family, who you know, spoke the language. The first time we got on the phone together, I knew the second I heard her say hello that she was the real deal. And so without much further delay, I want y'all to have that same experience that I did of hearing this beautiful voice and those terrific stories. Mrs. Anderson, do you want to read for us?
Yes, I will, and thank you very much for that beautiful talk.
My pleasure.
Expired praise. Thank you. Light. Am I too far?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Go for it.
In 1934, my mother took a job at a cafe nearby, Friendly Lunchroom, over on Hernandez Street at Calhoun Avenue. That became an important place for my family. Brother Robert picked his guitar at that cafe. The Smith family ran the place. They had been around the neighborhood for as long as we had lived there. They moved into the upstairs of the big yellow house at 291 East Georgia after we left. Alice Smith and my mother were best friends. The Smith's daughter, Geneva, was one of my best friends. Of course, the Smiths knew all about my mother's cooking. The Smith Cafe, strictly a soul food restaurant, served black-eyed peas, candied yams, collard greens, spaghetti, pigtails, oxtails, ham hocks, and skins. fried chicken, smothered pork chops, fried catfish, chitterlings, and buffalo fish. My mother made barbecue pork shoulder and ribs, and she was second cook. My mother made the barbecue sauce, and my father grew the herbs, vegetables, and fruit that went into the barbecue sauce. From the sidewalk on Hernando Street, steps led into the front door of the cafe. You had the counters along the walls and the Seabird jukebox at the back. I remember Johnny Temple's records playing. His music was ribald. Black blues was not played on the radio. The building was elongated and pretty wide, shotgun style, with wood floors. There was a slide door you could come in from Calhoun, about midway in the room. People smoked everywhere, and there may have been spittoons, because people spat everywhere. The place served beer. The kitchen was in the back. It had a huge backyard, and they had a dog back there that bit me. I wasn't supposed to go back there, but Geneva and I were devils. She invited me back there, and I was dumb enough to go. Well, the dog wasn't going to bite her because it knew her. That's the first public place I've seen Brother Robert play to an audience. It had benches all around the side of the restaurant on the north and west, and people would always come and sit. Brother Robert played Little Boy Blue and Sitting on Top of the World. I stopped by the cafe with friends on my way home from school. People came from Beale Street, hangers around, and sat on the benches. We were able to sit on the stools at the counter and eat, but we had to leave after that. Mrs. Smith had another daughter, 7 years older than my sister, and 9 years older than me. We called her Miss B. She was a very pretty woman, light-skinned, nice head of hair, if you know the term. Not too long, not too big. She never got fat. She dressed well. I couldn't hang around the cafe long, but I did notice Miss B and Brother Robert together quite often. If you turn over the original of the famous pinstripe suit photo, you'll see a note on Robert's handwriting to Miss B. M. Miss B's real name was Bernice West. I don't know what the M stood for. We all knew her well and loved her. She went to Lemoyne College, got her degree, and became a social worker. I know by now she's 9 years older than me. She's gone. Miss B is who Brother Robert sang about in Walking Blues. I feel like blowing my old lonesome home. Got up this morning, my little Bernice was gone. I would run into Miss B several times over the years to come. In that song, Brother Robert sang about riding the blinds. That too comes from his life. Brother Robert rode the blinds. That didn't have to mean a cattle car. I'm talking about anywhere a person can see. Could be on the running board. And if the wind is blowing, he'd ride backwards. My mother picked cotton and chopped cotton, and they'd pick you up at dark in the morning to take you to Arkansas or Mississippi. If Brother Robert was available, he'd take a ride to Hernando or that ride across the bridge to Arkansas, and he wasn't going to pick cotton. He wouldn't get a seat inside under the canopy rather. Riding the blinds is hitching a ride and catching on wherever you can't see. I never knew where he was going when he left. Could have used a lamp.
Great.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank
Wow.
you very much too for inviting me.
It's beautiful to hear you read that. I read over that passage last night. So I read the book a while ago, so I reread a few passages, and that was a part that I reread. So I love that part a lot. Um, so you talked about some of the things that Brother Robert played. Could you tell us a little bit more about the wide variety of music that he played, or what you remember him playing?
Oh, I remember hearing all of his songs. All that he recorded, I had heard them. But I didn't know until many years later that he had recorded those songs.
But and so how did you find out that he recorded them?
Well, I became my sister's representative. So it meant that I had to go around trying to find out where the assets were when I became her representative. So I ran into various bluesmen. I interviewed them, and they told me a lot. And I ran into a young man called, he was just above a boy at that time, Professor Harp, who gave me a lot of information about various blues, including the British boys. I also ran into Ed Coyne, who was a photographer for UMass, and I got to know him. So he's the one too that introduced me to the British boys. So this is how I learned from them, and WMUA. I still have connections with them, and they played the blues, and I knew the young woman who was the announcer, and I got to know her very well. So this is how I learned from the young people. They were all much younger than I.
Let me interject real quick, Mrs. Anderson, just to explain a little bit more of what you're talking about. You know, the situation that Mrs. Anderson is describing there is that she was in charge of, or in order to prove that she could be the executor of the Robert Johnson estate, one of the things she had to do, in addition to providing proof that she was related and part of the same family and therefore entitled to his estate since he died without a will, she had to go around and prove that he had composed the songs that he had recorded, you know, because there was no or very limited documentation of that, at least available at that time. You know, it wasn't common knowledge at all. And so she had to, you know, starting from scratch, from nowhere, had to become a blues detective, you know, well up into her 50s, I think it was, right? You started going out to the clubs and interviewing all the people he ran with, Johnny Shines and Honey Boy Edwards. Tell us a little bit about that and what it was like to meet those guys after the fact and how they reacted to you.
Well, I met them all. Um, I first went to the Speakeasy, and before that, there's a paper out in a little magazine that was out in Boston called the Phoenix. And every time I picked the Phoenix up, I'd see a name that I recognized, but I said this couldn't be the name. That was Big Walter Horton.
Mm-hmm.
That got me to the Speakeasy because I wanted to see if this was the Big Walter Horton that I knew in Memphis and sat with his little baby sister in the fifth grade. So I went and I did meet him there. And of course, he was the one. But the person that introduced me and helped me find him was Professor Hart. Because it was very dark in there, and I was going all around. And he walked up to me and said, "Can I help you?" I said, "I'm looking for Big Walter." He says, "You passed him several times." But I was looking for the Big Walter that I knew when I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
And he was young. And so he had gotten old and sort of decrepit,
Okay.
not on his harmonica, I have to say that.
Right. Never lost that, did you?
Boss harmonica, the best on the market.
Yeah.
And so this is how I started. So I met Steve Ray Vaughan, met him several times, Mr. Summerlin, and Sunnyland Slim, and I could just go through. I met them all, and that's just one place I started. Then I learned about the Tam', so I met a lot of them there. Then I learned about O'Doyle. So I met quite a few, and then on throughout Cambridge, and then the Iron Horse here, UMass. It was Blues Town then. We had the Blue Wall, so I did a lot of research there, and
Well, take us back a little bit to what Brother Robert was like as a person. You know, you've shared so many of your stories with me, but you know, you were talking a minute ago about the soul food restaurant where he used to play, or some of your family were employed. What was he? What was his favorite food, and how was he at the dinner table?
well, he liked them all. He liked the squash, and the pumpkin, fried pumpkin. I know people have never heard of fried pumpkin, but it's a delicious dish. And of course, it was a soul food restaurant. So everything, chitlins, he liked those, and we all did. And barbecued ribs, of course, that was a special. And the turnip greens, mustard greens, collard greens, peas, you name it, was served there.
He looked like he had great metabolism. Well, tell us a little bit about what, you know, what music was like in your family, what kind of role music played, what people enjoyed listening to, and how Robert's music
as,
played a role in your family get-togethers.
as I pointed out, no blues was played in my mother's house.
Yeah,
So that was the end
no
of
finger
that.
popping.
But that's right, no finger popping. But my father was a musician himself. So he played at frolics when he was young and before he left Hazelhurst. So my sister Bessie played the organ and piano. Sister Carrie could sing. My sister Charlene could play by ear. And all the family could play by ear. And our son was a professional guitarist.
Hmm.
Taught Robert Johnson how to play. And my father, long before he went to the Delta. I have to point that out.
Okay.
Yes, and he played spirituals. He knew every spiritual in the songbook,
Wow.
gospel, and of course he played with his brother, son, who played jazz, jazz musician too. So he would accompany him, and of course Louis Armstrong was a household word, along with Gene Autry and many of the other Western singers. Did I answer your question?
And more, and you can just keep going if you want to. I'm sure everybody is devouring this.
Well, I've told you about Jimmy Rogers
Yes.
in my book. And of course, that's one of my favorite country music singers. And the reason for it, it brings me and Brother Robert together because I could sing uh, with him on Waiting for a Train. And of course, the reason, and I still like it today because it brings back warm memories of Brother Robert. And he used to take me up to the train tracks and watch the train stop and blow the steam out. And so I have fond memories. And so in all of his entertainment, he always did two things that was done with the country western music, and that was Waiting for a Train and Gene Autry, silver haired daddy of mine.
Hmm.
And of course, I know that was my father, you know. And I think it's a very beautiful song. And I'm still a country music buff. I listen to it every day. MUA comes on at on let's see, I believe it's Monday morning. Yeah, Monday morning at 6. And I have to keep it low, but I turn it on and I hear the country music because he does the classics. I like the classics. I can't relate too much to the new because it's lost its thread. It's not there. But you know, young people do change things.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, it looks like we've got some questions coming in from the audience. Augusta, do you want to ask some of those? I don't have my reading glasses on.
Yeah, sure. Also some comments. Mr. David Whitus, I don't know if I'm pronouncing the last name right, is saying that he had the pleasure of meeting you, Mrs. Anderson, at the Speakeasy, and he was really happy to learn from you that that Big Walter knew Robert Johnson because he wasn't aware of that. But he also says that we need to note that Robert Johnson also influenced so many great blues artists like Elmore James, Robert Jr. Lockwood, of course, and Sonny Boy Williamson, and so many more. So I just wanted to get that get that in there. We also have from Jonathan Hilben a request for how he can get his hands on some of your barbecue sauce, because I understand that you cook some great barbecue sauce, but he's in Mississippi, so it may be difficult.
Yeah.
Well, I'm working with some people and they're supposed to help me get it on the market. I'm waiting. Um, they want to use a photograph, and I couldn't give them permission. They have to talk to my attorney. And so I'm waiting for them to get back to me so I can present to my attorney what they want to know.
And is that your mother's recipe that Brother Robert enjoyed so well that you're working
That
with?
was his favorite barbecue sauce. And I have to say it was the best around because I make it and I've sold it everywhere. Everybody knows me in Amherst as the barbecue sauce lady and the garlic lady. I am a farmer.
Well, I've had the pleasure. The sauce is definitely all that. It'll sting you like a Robert Johnson guitar solo.
Sounds amazing. I hope to have the pleasure someday. Let's see. I have a gentleman named Joe Cushley here who says he interviewed you for the BBC Blues show, Mrs. Anderson. And he says some people have said that Robert Johnson's records play too fast. And he wonders if that maybe they were sped up in the recording or that they're being played in a sped up way. But do the records sound the way you remember Robert Johnson,
It
your
was,
brother Robert, sounding?
yes, it was right on target
Yeah.
because I heard him play that one many, many times. So it didn't seem too fast. Now,
Okay.
he could speed up some of his recordings in person because as children we like to dance. So he would do the up tempo, like a song like excuse me, Last Fair Deal. You can up that one. I don't think you can up Terror playing the dance off. It's a listening uh, recording.
And Jay Campbell wants to know, what is your favorite song of your brother's?
Well, as a child, I could dance off a Last Fair Deal. Of course, with Waiting for a Train, I could sing with him, and I know those words today. Um, Terror plane would have to be, because I thought it was a car. I had no idea it was something else.
Double entendre.
What?
He said double entendre.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I use another word, and I was trying to reach for it, but it escapes me.
Okay. If it comes to you, break in and let us know. So a good question here comes from Pat Rayner. She said, where would Mrs. Anderson go to hear music in Memphis in her day? And what musicians other than Robert Johnson did she hear play live?
Well, I was too young, my brother, and I could go to the house parties before, people really got together, which they would play for the children. But I never went to, except to the homes, to people's homes that I knew.
Mm-hmm.
I never, at my age, my mother, you wouldn't go to Bill Street unless you were going to the theater, and you had to be, when 5 o'clock came, you got to be coming out of that movie. And of course, the owner of the Palace Theater knew that, and he would haul us all out, and we would be on our way home. So when I went to the movie during Brother Robert's time, I was very young. I was only 12.4 when he died. So,
In terms of live music, though, I know you mentioned reconnecting with Big Walter earlier. And had you heard Big Walter perform back in the 30s when your brother was alive?
oh, he at the house for the
Okay.
first time. He's the only bluesman that I knew Brother Robert associated with.
Okay.
I never saw Johnny Shines or Lockwood. If they came to Memphis, I never saw those. I'm not saying that they weren't there,
Uh-huh.
but I know that Brother Robert was almost 15 years old when he left my father's house. So I know he knew every bluesman there before he got to the Delta.
Hmm.
So there was W.C. Handy. Everybody knew where the park was. And of course, you didn't go in it because people gambled, and you could just peep through the heavy bushes that surrounded the park at that time. There was a path that went through that path and led right to the Pantay drugstore. It may have been there when you were there. I could peep through and see Brother Robert through there, but you
Okay.
weren't allowed to go in because everything went on over in the park.
Indeed, yes. Well, we got a little pack of good questions from Steve Chesbro, who wants to know, did your brother go by the name Bob?
Oh,
Uh, did he play piano? What type of education did he have? Did he enjoy reading? And he thanks you.
well, what was the first question?
Did he go by Bob? Did they ever go by the name of Bob?
Brother is the only person that referred to him as Bob.
Okay, Mama Julia.
Only one, Mama Julia, referred to him as Bob, and he was known as Robert. To Carrie, he was Robert, and my father, Robert.
Hmm.
So all any other aliases that I've read about in the book, I never heard of,
Okay.
but I don't know anything about any aliases. I
And did,
wasn't there, and as I said, I didn't have him in my pocket.
right.
But can't imagine all those names out there, all those aliases, and so I have my doubts, but I can't. I don't have the proof.
I understand. And did Brother Robert play piano?
He could play piano, but not like his brother's son. They
Hmm.
they would play together.
Okay.
On the bass, the boogie woogie. One on the bass and keys, and the other on the ivory, as I call them.
Right. Well, yeah, I remember when we were speaking with Mr. Wald and Mr. Goralnik, they were very interested in that anecdote because it seemed to offer another instance of Robert playing, that heavy bass at the same time as the light, quick treble the way he did on the guitar.
Yes, well,
Might
that's
have been where he got an idea from.
yeah. I call it the black keys.
There you go.
I never learned. I was exposed to a piano, but music just wasn't in my blood.
I gotcha. Now, another question Mr. Chesbro has asked, was Robert a reader? Was he a big reader?
He did read. He read the paper. We took two papers. One is still there, the Commercial Appeal,
Uh,
at the press seminar, and I was reared up with those two papers. That's how I learned to read. My mother, we all read the paper, and so did Brother Robert, and he knew what was going on, in the world, other than where he lived. For example, in one of his recordings, he mentions the word Ethiopia.
mhm.
Well, he had to read to know about that because that was in the paper almost every day.
It certainly was during that time. It was when Emperor Haile Selassie was successfully rebuffing Italy, right, from colonizing Ethiopia.
Right, and we
That would
all
have been big black news, in other words, during that time.
right, we all were interested in it. All the black folks were interested in that. And then what's the other guy uh, that had the problem with England? I can't think of his name.
I'm not too sure.
Not Haile Selassie. I can't think of his name right now as well as I know it. But
Um,
he knew everything that was going on
he kept up, huh?
in the world.
So we
And
have a nice question from Gabriela Mendonça, who asks, who were some of the artists that inspired Brother Robert?
You know, I'm writing a second book, and that escapes me because it doesn't, the time frame doesn't fall into all the people they say he learned from. And I won't deal with that too much because I'm taking that up in a second book. I'm
Okay.
dealing with the time he left my father's house. I'm dealing with the time that he was exposed to his brother's son, which was known as a guitar player. He played everything, and he played the piano. And Brother Robert learned from him. And that's about all I can say on that because I'm going deeply into that in my second book.
Well, I wish you would brought it up for your first book.
Um, Elijah Wald was wondering if it was Jomo Kenyatta that you were thinking about in
No,
terms of
that old,
the news, and then someone else was bringing up Marcus Garvey as another important figure.
no,
Um,
this person was foreign, in a foreign country.
so not Jomo Kenyatta.
No, I'm not familiar with that person. I
Okay.
think England, this guy was freed from England. I think, I can't think of his name, wasn't Haile Selassie. He was one.
Well, we're going to have to keep thinking on that. There are a ton, of course, of happy birthday wishes to you. So happy birthday once again.
Mhm.
I think that's really important. We have a question from Kyle Thompson that says, do you think Robert Johnson's role in shaping Black history is undervalued? And how can his importance be recognized without promoting a one-dimensional version of such a complicated person?
That's a little difficult to handle. I have a problem with the books that depict him as a drunkard and cursing God. And I feel that I should have seen some of this because one thing, we were very close together, and I could go wherever he went, to the store, to Bill Street, to the place that we took photographs. And you know, I don't know whether that answers your question or not.
Well, I think that the one question in there was, is Robert Johnson's role in shaping Black history underappreciated or undervalued?
I think it is because I take a survey every time I go out. If I see a young man, and most you're going to see are Caucasians, I will catch him. I'll hobble over if he's going on that side. I'll hobble and catch him and ask him questions. First, I'll ask if he ever heard of Robert Johnson. This is my survey, and that's going to be in my second book. And most Caucasians have. But when I stop a Black person, they don't know.
Ah, okay.
And I deal with the schools too sometimes when they have programs. I do go. And the younger Caucasians think that Eric Clapton did it all. They don't know. So I would agree that he's not valued historically as he should.
Well, it's interesting seeing, and I agree with you that he hasn't been as popular among African American fans as he has among whites in the past, whatever, 50 years. But it's interesting seeing some of the younger Black artists now gravitate to him. There's a guy called, I didn't make up his name, don't shoot the messenger, a musical Negrito, who is a popular current artist. So in other words, he's not some, one of these old timey guys. And he continually draws on the music and the history of Robert Johnson. And in fact, I think he has read your book because he talked about, what a travesty it was that the family, I think he's referring to you there, was not the beneficiary of his estate. So there's actually more awareness among African American fans now than maybe there was 10, 15 years ago.
Right, and I'm not aware of any Blacks. Uh, you met Professor Harp, or you know about him.
I know of him, yeah.
Has a book out, Ain't No Uncle Tom in My Blues, and he tells it all. And this is the way it is. I mean, we thought it was Uncle Tom. I never did, but
Because
there,
of the style of the music, yeah.
yeah, that was Uncle Tom. But that's because we didn't know our history. In my second book, I'm going to be bringing some history that's never been told. And when those young kids come out on the commons and to change the world, and they're the ones who will have to change the world, I'm going to tell them to tell the Library of Congress to open up the archives because those books are there. I did all of my undergrad work at the Library of Congress for 4 years. I don't think they allow students to go in and have access to those books. But I had a friend who was a librarian, and he got the books for the presidents, the senators, the representatives. So I got every book that I wanted. They are there, and the true history of America, well, I won't say true, but you don't, it's not in the curriculum at the schools. That's one
Yeah.
of the big problems.
That's just now being dealt with, but you're right. It's been suppressed and swept under the rug for such a long time. We have a lighthearted question, Mrs. Anderson, from Robbie Ray. He is a musician in the United Kingdom who's with us today. He asks, did your mom's barbecue sauce go with the hot tamales brother Robert sang about? If not, where were his favorite tamales from?
They were from Mexicans, real Mexicans that would come at night, and
Oh, wow.
they're red hot.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and then may have spiked his song at night, and they'd come twice. The best hot tamales you ever tasted. Some people say they weren't clean, but honey, we ate them. They were super good. Yeah,
Sounds fantastic.
my mother didn't make hot tamales, but her barbecue sauce would wait a minute. And of course, I have tried to copy her recipe, and it has sold all over. It has gone to Australia, England, Wales. I belong to a little bit at all food stores, and I forget this place that has trips, and people come from all over the world, and that's how I got it to Australia. They came here and bought it and took it back.
Mhm. Another question. It's a double question about oh, and somebody brought up Gandhi, and you and I have discussed Gandhi before. I think that's who you're talking about.
That's the man I was trying to.
Yes. Thank you to Tom Garrett who mentioned that. Yes, that's exactly correct. So David Gogo asks about photographs of Brother Robert. He says, do you know what became of the photo that Gail Wardlow had? Maybe he means Mac McCormick there. I don't know that Gail had one. Somebody help me out there. And then do you believe that the photo of the two young gentlemen with guitars, I think, is actually Brother Robert? If you remember that one, it came out about 10 years ago.
Uh, I have a great deal of books, and I with photos. The only real photos of Brother Roberts, one with a cigarette in his mouth, and the one with the pinstripe suit.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only two.
Mm-hmm.
A photo was taken with Lewis and Brother Robert. Lewis is in his sailor suit because he was in the Navy. Brother Robert is in his pinstripe suit. Mac McCormick has that photograph. I guess I can see it. I know from that he has it, took it, and we've tried to get it back, and that's I don't think I can divulge, what really happened, but not Wadlow, McCormick has the photo. He's gone on, but his daughter has everything he has. He has a daughter.
That's correct. We looked into that when we were working on the book, and
Right.
that's where it stays right now.
To find out how much I can say.
Oh, don't worry about it. That's in the book, so don't sweat
My
that.
attorney wanted to, go for it, but I know it would be money lost. I didn't have that kind of money.
Right.
But I'm one for hammering it. I was nicknamed the hammer on my job because I never let anything go.
Oh, I didn't know that. Maybe that can be the title of your second book then. Somebody was asking about that.
I would like, yeah, I'd like to get the photo. It's Lewis and Brother Robert.
It,
That's what
it,
he has.
it's been seen, it exists, but yeah, it's something that Mac McCormick obtained from your sister years back, and
All of these books came from my sister. I
right.
can look
Yeah,
through
yeah.
and see. And what Levere did, he chipped up her biographical information. He gave a little bit here, which was true, and the other, because I know they added on, you know, their thinking. You can see it's a lot of speculation in the books. And so
Well, we have another question from Pat Rayner, who asks, when and where did Robert get his first guitar?
he got it in Memphis, Tennessee. His sister Carrie bought several of them for him, and his very first came from her, came from Sears and Roebuck's. That's where we spent our little money from Montgomery Ward and Sears and Roebuck's back then. And I'll throw this in while we're talking about Roebuck. You know, it's not in the curriculum, and this is sad. This is one of the problems. People don't know that Mr. Roebuck was black.
News to me.
News to me too. I mean, that's hugely important.
You'd be
You know, one of the most recognizable names, the Sears and Roebuck catalog. So tell us more about that.
just Mr. Sears bought him out. You know, we as blacks, we run into hard times, and I guess you know the money looked good in here. So you know, there are a lot of things that are not in the books, the curriculum. And I'm a member of PTA and Parent Teachers Association. I donate to them every year, and I'm going to tell them what our main problem here is the curriculum, because whites, not blacks, know what really happened, but it's in the archives.
Very important for us to get those additions from you because you've done so much research and you lived through a time that a lot of us didn't live through.
Right, well,
Um,
I was privileged. I used to be a secretary at the Library of Congress, and I got books that most people never get a chance to see because I knew the person who knew all about the books. And these young people who come out on the commons, they need to go to the Library of Congress and tell them to open up the archives. It's there. People don't know that the first slave ships left New England. They didn't lose from Louisiana. They left from Gloucester.
Gloucester, I thought Marblehead, but definitely
Where
I thought Marblehead, Massachusetts.
they have left from there too, but they left from Gloucester, came
Wow.
back to the war, and they came back to New York. But people talk about down yonder, but up yonder.
Up south and down south is the only or the only region, according to Mrs. Anderson, in this country.
That's right. It's only two reasons. And I've had people to come here and read, and I think the man got a little etchy, but it doesn't bother me because people don't know. The history's not there for people to see. So you can't know.
So we have a question about Brother Robert reading the Bible and attending church. Can you weigh in on that for us?
I've never seen him read a Bible.
Uh-huh.
But I have his mother's Bible. I have Brother Granville's Bible. My father had a Bible, and Hugh, it was a Bible. I have Sister Carrie's Bible. I have Lewis's Bible. And before I moved and got lost, I had Robert. Family members always had a Bible. My father had a Bible very big, but I never saw Brother Robert read a Bible, but he knew every hymn in the book. His mother was very religious.
And that's Mama Julia, right? Someone that you were close to.
Oh, yeah, well, I had the utmost respect for her. She had a hard time, and my sympathy goes, for her, you know. And when I read the books about her, you know, I want to hit somebody in the head.
Wow. Well, what aspect of Mama Julia have they gotten wrong?
I know I won't go into it, but I know it's speculation. People add to what she was a decent person. She just hit on hard times, and there's a lot I can say about the the topics that are talked about, even about Brother Robert, and even about my father. People speculate, so they write what the readers want to hear. To sell, and a lot of it, I, because I have to talk to my lawyer. A lot of it is just untrue.
Well, it's interesting, part of what has made Robert Johnson enigmatic to history is his own personal history, having come from being conceived out of wedlock, or however you want to state it, and then still being part of your family with your father. So the breakdown, I guess, for those of us who haven't for those of y'all who haven't read the book yet and aren't familiar with the Robert Johnson family tree and how Mrs. Anderson fits into it, her father was married to Robert Johnson's mother prior to Robert Johnson's birth. They were separated in a highly dramatic story that I urge you to buy the book and read. It is as
May I,
hair-raising and
may
intense.
I, may I introduce something?
You know
That's
better than I.
no. Don't forget your trend of thought.
Okay.
That story about that has never been told.
Well, it's in your book.
Some of it.
You're killing me with this second book and this new material. But so they were separated. That is, your father and Robert Johnson's mother were separated after having been married and had several children, three or four of which survived and went to Memphis with him after he left Hazelhurst. And so the family reunited in a way some years later. And so Robert really was a child both of Memphis and your father's household, and Mama Julia, his mother's household in Mississippi. And I think fans are a lot more familiar with the Mississippi part of Brother Robert's lineage and less up to speed on the history that you know of the family in Memphis. And so that's one aspect of the Robert Johnson biography that you've really filled in. There just was not a ton of information about prior to you coming forward. So I do want people to understand that this was a complicated family story, and complicated due to the racial situation in Mississippi in the early 20th century, which I think you can imagine, how that was. Mrs. Anderson, we have what I consider to be a very nice question from someone that wants to know if Brother Robert gambled and played the numbers.
You know, I never saw him. I know people who did play the numbers, because everybody during the Great Depression played the Sanctified, the Holy Rollers, and everybody else. My mother played the numbers.
Uh-huh.
I used to know one that she always played, and she won on it and bought her a coat because she needed a coat. And I know she paid $18 for that coat. It was a beautiful coat. When she passed, I gave it to a neighbor. Uh, but I don't think he gambled, because I would have seen dice. But people in the neighborhood did. Every Sunday they did. They went over on the railroad tracks and gambled. And so, everybody played the numbers, whether they went to church or didn't go, and hoping that they would hit, just like people play the numbers here.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Now it's called the lottery, and the state is the big
It's
winner.
the lottery, but I still call it the numbers.
It's the same thing.
Same thing.
I got to start back playing. I haven't played in a long time. It's a long shot.
Might as well take it if you got an extra buck laying around.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I don't see anything wrong with it because people say Christ ran the people out of the church that would, so they connect the numbers with things biblically. But
oh, okay.
but a lot of things they don't connect that they ought to connect biblically. They don't even mention it. You don't even hear ministers preaching it. So,
Speaking of ministers preaching, a question from David Gogo. He says that he has been to 3 different grave sites to pay tribute to Robert. Where do you believe Brother Robert was laid to rest?
I can't discuss that. That's in my second book. But he makes a good point.
Yes, there are 3.
Got 3 places where he's buried. The only way he could be buried in 3 places, the body would have to be dismembered.
Well, we don't want to think about that too long and hard. Another question, lighter hearted than that. Did Robert Johnson yodel when he performed Jimmy Rogers songs?
Oh yes, he could yodel. I mean, he had that country music down pat. Yeah, and out of all of his entertainment, no matter whether they were black or white, and he did have a lot of white audience that people don't know. He wasn't shy at all. He was used to being around white people because they came to the house.
You told me about uh, an insurance salesman, I think, who would make the rounds and who would pick guitar with Son. So that's kind of an interesting, personal connection.
Well, he was a country music buff.
Makes
And so
sense.
was Son. You know what I mean? And if you live in Tennessee, you're gonna know all of them. So, um, yes, they played. What is it? The Great Speckled Bird.
Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And do you know? Over the years, I never knew that he was referring to an eagle. I didn't know an eagle was speckled. One lit in my garden, and I knew as big as that bird was, it had to be an eagle. And I realized, and I talked to some people. They said, "Yeah, they're around. Turkeys around, walking through your garden. Yeah." And I'm trying to think. Roy Acuff.
Yeah,
Yep.
another star of that time.
Hmm.
Uh,
And all of the classic country music singers. You knew them all.
so David Whitus has a good question. David, you got to make your questions shorter. I know you're a long form guy. I love that about you. But let me see if I can get through David's question. He's curious about a lyric that Brother Robert wrote in the song "Sweet Home Chicago" about California, and he's wondering how Brother Robert is really using California in that song. I guess in the sense it doesn't really fit with "Sweet Home Chicago."
It,
So what does that
it
mean?
fits. It fits. It's saying via California.
Okay,
He's
so
going
he's
through California to get to Chicago. You remember he traveled. He hoboed, and my mother had a first cousin in California, but I don't remember what part. He uh, he probably touched base with him, there in California. He may not have, but his name was Alonzo, and you'll find Johnny Shines. Speaking of Alonzo, when I was doing my research and trying to find where the assets were in order to open the estate, I met Johnny Shines at UMass, and I told him that story.
mhm.
Then I saw a book that some writer had put out. Johnny Shines had repeated that he knew a lot.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah. That's
You
the
know,
grapevine.
he can't sue me for that because I got it out of his mouth. I've heard it all. Yeah. See, this is why I say you can't take everything that the bluesmen tell the writers.
Yeah, I think that for a while there, in terms of a bluesman's career as an interesting person, having an association with Robert Johnson might be good for somebody's career. I've heard a really prominent, knowledgeable person who spent a lot of time around blues musicians of that generation. Who would have been contemporary to Brother Robert, say that some of them, you know, to some of those old guys, Robert Johnson was their ticket to ride. That's exactly what he said.
Exactly, and this is what my second book is going to cover some of it. Some that I know they didn't know.
Okay.
Time frame doesn't fit. And the teaching Robert Robert how to play the guitar, the time frame doesn't fit. And I'm
Right.
not gonna say they lied, but he wasn't there. And you know, and they see when these books were written, they didn't know anything about his stepfather, my father. They didn't know. And so they didn't even son, he had a brother who was a guitarist and a piano player and known in Memphis. But he didn't, the writers weren't told that because the people who talked to the writers didn't know. Not even Son House.
Oh, okay. Now, this is a fun question that someone has just sent submitted, which is, did you ever hear much about Brother Robert's travels as a hobo or otherwise?
Well, I know he and Son travel a lot. I've seen them hitch a train
Yeah.
because at the right at the train track. And I told you they would play the song "I'm a poor boy a long way from home," and I knew they're going down to see Mama Julia, or going through maybe to play the guitar. And yeah, I've seen them catch the train, so I know. And I know they went to Mexico. They love Mexico. And I guess one of the reasons Brother Robert loved Texas, you know, Jimmy Rogers, they both had a lot in common. He died of tuberculosis. We had family members who had it. And Brother Robert used to do Jimmy Rogers TV blues. I know you've heard that one.
Yeah.
Mhm. So he related to other hobos as well, huh? Because you know, that was part of Jimmy Rogers' shtick, I guess, being the singing brakeman. Well, he wouldn't be a hobo if he was a brakeman, but
Yeah, well, that.
the train imagery was strong with them.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think.
What kind of, you know, you talk, let's talk a little bit about the women in your family, because I really thoroughly enjoyed hearing about people like Mama Julia, about your mother, Mrs. Spencer, about Sister Carrie, about Sister Bessie. Robert Johnson was surrounded by, you know, very nurturing and important influential women in his life. Tell us a little bit about them and the kind of impact that they had on him.
Well, his oldest sister was Hattie, and during the Great Migration, she went to Chicago,
Hmm.
and we had Sister Lula. Those were the older ones. I never met them. They died before I ever met them. But they went to Chicago, and Sister Hattie, I believe, I have to look at my list of marriage license. Uh, she may have left Mississippi and went directly to Chicago, but she died. All three of them died of tuberculosis.
Hmm.
I think this is important to Brother Robert because uh, of that with Jimmy Rogers, because he died of tuberculosis. Did you know that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
They
So I
bonded about
think
that.
that was a lot of common, you know, I feel that there's a connection.
Yeah.
Texas, they both love Texas. And he died of tuberculosis. We had it in our family. So, and then
Well,
the third thing, traveling, trains, the three
right.
things.
Well, I'll tell you, in terms of the women in your family, one of my heroes in the book is Sister Carrie. And so Sister Carrie is Mrs. Anderson and Robert Johnson's shared half sister. Okay. So Sister Carrie and Robert had the same mother, right? Yeah,
Right,
same mother. And then you and Sister Carrie had the same father. So in
right,
other words, each of you were half siblings and were all close to one another. It seemed like Sister Carrie was the closest relation between you and Robert Johnson.
right.
Uh, you know, what was she like? She was such an amazing person throughout his life and after.
She's amazing. I think about her every day. She taught me everything that my mother didn't know I knew how to do, and that was iron, cook. My mother was still washing and ironing for me. But
Mhm.
Sister Kara's, I was washing and ironing for her.
Mhm.
I think about it. But one day I told my mother I didn't like the way she ironed my dress. And my mother kicked her heels up. I said, let me do it. My mother didn't know I could iron.
That's
And
good
she
news.
taught me how to iron a man's shirt because I was practically grown then. But I didn't have any brothers to iron for, and I didn't wash. I wasn't washing my own clothes. Yeah, she taught me everything, how to shop. At 10 years old, I could go to Sears and Roebuck. I could go to Montgomery Ward. I could go to Greens. I could go to Schwab's and
Mhm.
shop for her. And I knew about Habitages. At Habitages, I had an account and bought furniture there. At 16, I had an account at Goldsmith. I got all that from my sister.
Mhm.
Taught me everything.
And she was really the one who took care of everybody in the family. And even after Brother Robert passed on, she was the one who really fought for his legacy and was the one who started the legal proceedings in order to be named head of his estate. And it never happened. And I think that's one of the great tragedies of this whole history. She is the one who, I mean, all the photos that you see, Sister Carrie took care of. The stories that you know for sure.
One except this one, my father's.
Yeah, right, right, right. So the ones that are have been in circulation for longer came from Sister Carrie's collection.
Absolutely.
She took care of those photos for decades when nobody else gave a damn about any of this material.
And LeVille lied and said that to that book company that you know about, and said that my sister and he went through her cedar chest and found the photographs. She did keep them in her cedar chest, but he didn't go through. I never went through my sister's cedar chest until after she passed.
Mhm.
Her and I have her cedar chest, that very cedar chest. I have the furniture that she bought, and I'm on pins because I've got to find a place for it. You know, but anyway, yes, she did. She had them in a handkerchief. This is what people, they carried the paper sack or they wrapped stuff in a handkerchief. It
Mhm.
wasn't a paper bag or anything. It was just in a big, it may have been a napkin because it was large, but that's the way she kept it. And I went into her cedar chest for the first time in my life after she passed. And I have had her furniture shipped, stored for over a year after we sold the house. And then it was moved up here. That cedar chest came and it's in storage right now. I have had it in an apartment, but I had a fire. And so, you know, I this is the bedroom wouldn't take the second bedroom with the cedar chest. Yes, Miss Carrie had all of that. She kept everything. Just like I have all of her letters, she had all of mine. She never
Mhm.
threw away anything. I made a mistake throwing away Mama Julia's letters
Mhm.
and my brother James' letters and who else? Sis Bessie and Brother Grandma, because we all communicated by writing.
Yes, and of course, Sister Carrie also had held on to the postcard that Brother Robert had sent back home from his recording session in Dallas, which
And
is
he was
a big.
fortunate enough not to give Steve Levere that
Mhm.
photograph. They tried to get it from me, the Mississippi courts,
Mhm.
but
Um,
they never got it.
and your Sister Carrie was also the first one, I think, to send you to Beale Street. What was going on Beale Street in Brother Robert's day?
Oh, we went. He always took me when he would go shopping for her because he'd pay a bill at Habitage's or if she had one at Goldsmith. Goldsmith, those were the two stores that would give an accounts to black people.
Hmm.
Lowenstein was a little upscale, and Gerber's, you didn't go in it until later. You know how I got in it.
Mm-mm.
A lot about, yeah, I used to work for Miss Gerber.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so, but I went in when I was young, not knowing, but I was looking for the novelties, the threads and the tapes and what. So they didn't mind selling it to me. But if I had gone in for something else, I wouldn't have gotten it. And then I did shop there after they knew who I was. All my uniforms came from there. Everything came from there. And she paid $1 for everyday drinking glasses. I thought I'd fall out when I found $1 for a drinking glass.
We had another question about Beale Street earlier, which was, what do you remember about Handy Park?
Uh, when Brother Robert was living, I never went there when he was living. I know he and Son frequented the whole of Beale Street, Handis Park, and everywhere else. But later, the Palace Theater, when I could go, my mother would let us go on a Saturday sometimes, and when I had the money. And I usually did because I've always had a business and I earned my money, my show fare, and I could take another friend. It used to be a dime, and then finally it went up to a quarter.
Those were the days.
Yeah, that was a lot of money, but you could go and see Count Basie, Jimmy
Yes.
Lawrence, all of the jazz players, Duke Ellington. So when looking back, that's not bad. But
Not
for a
no.
shoot 'em up, they started with a nickel. I remember going for a nickel, then it went on up and on up and on up. And then looking back, a quarter is not bad, but it was bad during the Depression.
I guess so.
You could get a nickel's worth of meal, nickel's worth of flour. You could get a stick of gum for a penny.
So, Professor Palmer, how much time do we have left? Anything else that you
Well,
want?
I think we have about 8 more minutes.
Oh, let me.
And I know I was wanting to ask one question of my own, which is that you described, Mrs. Anderson, that Brother Robert's style went from patches to pinstripes over the course of your knowing him. So I wonder if you would talk a little bit more about that, about how he grew up dressing and how it changed. And
Well, when he went to his mother's house, the men dressed in the khaki shoes. We call them mud hoppers, clobbers.
clodhoppers. Yeah.
Yes, and they you wore overalls, and of course, I guess that's all they could uh, afford. But I'm sure he didn't dress like that when he lived in Memphis, because you can see this photograph. He's around 18 here, and he doesn't have the overalls. But in the country they did, and they wore those high top yellow shoes, clodhoppers. You know, did you hear?
I did. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and straw hats, country style. And then, when he became upscale, he was wearing nun bush.
Fancy.
Those three, I forget the other ones. It'll come to me. The men
Floor,
wore, and
floor times.
floor shines, nun bush, and it's one other. The top shoes.
It'll come.
Yeah, right. And black people have always been noted for name brands. Sis Carrie got me into name brands. She told my mother I had a very expensive foot and I couldn't wear those cheap shoes. And she's right. I had four lasses, quadruple A, triple A, and double A, like Jocelyn O. Kennedy. We had to say, yeah. And so I had to get my shoes, foreign shoes. I forget the name of them now. The Italian shoes and the Swedish, because they make the last, and America didn't do it. Just one a B, and your foot would just slip right in it. Your heel would come up and out of it. Yeah, Sis Carrie was my mentor. She taught me everything I knew. And even though I'm the only person in the family that went to college and finished in many of the colleges, there was never a jealousy. You know, Sister Bessie thought I was the smartest thing going. I don't know how, but she did. Just they're just loving sisters, and they were that with everybody. So I know if Claude Johnson had come forth, he would have been accepted. We didn't know anything about Claude Johnson, and of course, I have enough to know that he was just put up there. You know, it's a long story. I'll go into details in my second book, but a little bit is touched on in this book. You know, I met John Hammond. Yeah, I met him um, at let's see where did I meet? At the wedding. Ronnie Earl. Do you know Ronnie Earl? Hey, I went to his wedding. I got to know Ronnie Earl because I watched him entertain very well many times. So I really got to know him. He invited me to uh, his wedding. So when I didn't hear from him, he kept writing. And I thought this was strange, but I said, I know Ronnie, and I had his autograph. He'd signed everything for me, and I went to many of his entertainments. And I saw this guy at the wedding treating me, just he kept looking. And he treated me for a long time. So finally, he came over to my table. I was sitting alone. I usually do. People join me, but I don't join, others. So unless I come with them. So, but anyway, he came over and he introduced himself to me, and I wrote his name down in my book. And of course, it got lost when I had a fire. He gave me an alias, but I didn't know, and so I accepted it. And he offered me a glass of wine. And normally, I don't accept wine from anybody out. But this time I said, yes, I'll take a glass of Chablis. And he brought it over and sat and talked. And he finally got around to why he came. He asked me, well, he already knew, because Ronnie had already told him that I knew Robert Johnson. So he wanted to strike up a conversation. And he asked me, did you know that Robert Johnson had a son? And I told him, no, he didn't have a son. He says, well, there is a son. And I said, if someone posing as a son, I said, I have a lawsuit. I got angry and started backing up. But he was feeling me out because he and his father were in on the court case. We were really duped. And my sister needed water put in her house. We spent so much money on the case, we couldn't help her get her water, in her house. And it's really, when I think about it, and my daughters, they go to pieces. But the, Steve Levere and Mac McCormick were crooks from the very beginning. He had no intentions of writing a book. Steve Levere came to write a book. Am I taking up too much?
No, no, this is very important stuff to get out there because a lot of people know, but not everybody
Oh,
knows. And it's really tragic that the family didn't get,
and so,
um,
and what he did to the writers, and I can see them in the book, all stacked over their books, and I got them here. And I have not all of them, but I have some of the most prominent writers, and they just told him a little of it, just told him, gave him a little of this, and I know it came from my sister. But then they added what they wanted to add to it, and you can tell when it's speculation because they speculated and said how he left his first wife, Virginia. Nobody knows that he left. I never heard of him leaving. She died, you know. But as I said, I don't defend what they say he did because I wasn't there. But I tell you, they told him an awful lot. And Son House did a lot of talking. But you can't leave somebody's house at a certain age not knowing how to pick a guitar. And then somebody's got to teach you to do it, because it didn't take the Rolling Stones and Eric Clapton that long to get on stage and make millions. That's just common sense. But people will ride on a person's popularity, and I think a lot, doing that. I know Memphis Slim did a lot of talking and bad talking about Brother Robert, and he claims to have known him. Well, I interviewed him at the Tam O'Shanna in Cambridge. If he told me something about, I asked him if he knew him. He said, "Yep, I know him," just like that, and that was it. He came there. Nobody knew him. He stayed over in France too long. So nobody knew him. But you have to think in terms of a little jealousy. Here's a person, and Memphis Slim knew he wasn't a country boy because they grew up in Memphis, and he claimed he brought him home, but he never said where he dropped him off. But Brother Robert knew as much about Memphis as Memphis Slim did, because he was reared there. He's not a country boy, he was a city boy. And none of those books knew that when they wrote. They just took down what the folks told them.
Mhm.
Well, there is one last question here because we are running out of time, but I think this is a good place to end it, which is a question from Sherry Kane, who said, "What do you think is the most important thing people should understand about Brother Robert?" So I asked that to you, Mrs. Anderson.
Well, what I would really want them to know, that he was very intelligent. I've never heard him curse God. And long as he spent time, we would have heard something. I've never seen him fall out drunk. Now, my father had old granddad that he drink from rock candy. And I'd have liked a hot water toddy, you know. And my mother made her wine. She didn't drink hard liquor, but she made her wine. And every Easter, somebody would give her a bottle of Patrick Henry. And that's once a year. Son did drink, and once in a while he'd get high. That's my brother Leroy. And he could act kind of ugly, when he got a little high. But I've never seen Brother Robert play, because he plays straight through. And what is your pleasure? He loved entertaining. I've never seen him drunk. And whenever he put on his coat to go to the store, I knew I could get my sweater down because I was going. Now, I didn't go to Bill Street. I don't know where he went. I know he knew W.C. Handy. A person can't have that kind of background and learn from Son House. That's all I can say. And that's a little bit that's going to be in my book. Okay.
It has been such a pleasure to have you here, Mrs. Anderson. Happy birthday.
Thank you
And
very much. And it's my pleasure to have you have me here and to think about my birthday. This is a great surprise.
thank you, Mr. Lauterback and Dr. Gregory, for the invitation to come to your class. It's been truly a pleasure. I know there's so many questions that people have, and I hope that there are going to be a lot more opportunities for them to ask them in the future, because I hear that after the pandemic quietens down a little bit, Mrs. Anderson has a ton of speaking engagements. People are
I do. I just got my teachers union. I'm just thinking of things that are coming up. And then I have Business West. Business West. I just thought of Business West, and that is a wide circulation. And then I added some colleges. Some I just got a point, like Northeastern and Brandeis and Harvard. I didn't go to Harvard, but I was accepted there in the educational program. So I said, all these places, I said, and it was a blues place at one time, Harvard University. And doing my investigative research, uh, they had blues over there.
well, everyone is sending you blessings and birthday greetings and thanks through the chat, Mrs. Anderson. Thanks to you all for being here. It's been such a pleasure. Anything you want to get in, Preston, here at the end?
Not at all. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to sit and listen to Mrs. Anderson. So I'm glad to have been a part of it. Thanks for having us, Augusta and Dr. Gregory both.
And
Okay,
I must say,
indeed.
I deeply appreciate what you've done and giving me an opportunity to express myself because I got carried away.
Well, we are the lucky ones, I have to say. We are the privileged ones to have had the opportunity to listen to you, and we so appreciate it. So I'm going to sign off now. We can all sign off. Thank you to McCoy and David Lautfy on the special events end too.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you.